That's quite an amazing thing. So we are looking now in the last great vision of Revelation. How's the light? Eh?
No, that's fine.
Okay, the last great vision of the book of Revelation. And we're having hopefully our eyes flooded with the light. Our eyes flooded with the light of the city of light. Because that's really what this is. I said to you last week, it's like the sun. If you can picture imaginatively the sun coming down and on top of Mount Kilimanjaro or whatever. This is what John sees, this cube. We looked at the cube last week. This cube comes down on top of the mountain, just like the Garden of Eden, and there it rests on the mountain probably, and John sees this, and the radiance is dazzling for him. He's sort of in awe of what he sees, and it's a city, it's a luminary. It's going to be, I nearly said illuminating. It's going to be radiating. It's going to be radiating and illuminating, if there's such a word, the glory of God into all the world, that God's glory might be fully displayed in the whole of creation. This is the place, as we're going to go further and further inside the city, this is the place where God's the epicenter of the glory of God in the world, the new creation, is going to be radiating from this place. So that's the big picture. The new heavens and new earth, remember that, there's the 8th and 9th vision. The new heavens and new earth come down, and now he sees this sort of center of light and of glory and of goodness. We're going to look at what the light means in this new creation radiating from this particular city that he's looking at. And it is a city, so we remind ourselves of all the things that a city means. It is a city that he sees very, very important. Let's remember, for the people who were reading this, all of the readers lived in cities. All of the churches that were addressed are all in cities. You have the 7 letters. Remember, this whole apocalypse is written to those 7 churches, and those 7 churches are in 7 cities. Ephesus, Smyrna, Laodicea, etc. They're all in the cities. And so this is very, very important. And we've been looking also, as we've gone through the book of Revelation, and particularly at Babylon, the fact that the great city of the day for the people in that was not Johannesburg or Hong Kong or New York or anything like that. The great city was Rome. Rome was the great city. Rome was the hope of the world at that time, with the promises that she offered, the security, the success, etc., the fame and the status for people who are looking to climb the ladder, get more recognition. Rome was the base where the people were looked to. All sort of roads lead to Rome, and the people in those 7 churches saw themselves as sort of minor cities, but wanting to become a bit more Roman-like as a city, because that was the standard. Rome was the standard of how it was. And one thing I hope to have done in the book of Revelation for you is to remind you that when you read your New Testament, you need to remember the historical context in which it was written. And Rome was very, very important for all the early Christians, and the influence and the attraction of Rome and all that it offered in Roman culture. But for the people who were then living in these 7 cities, as we've been mentioning, these people who were living in the 7 cities, they were under persecution, or going to be heading for some sort of persecution, the Christians living in these 7 cities, because as we've seen in the book of Revelation, they couldn't share in the ideas, in the practices, all the things that made Rome what it was becoming inhospitable to Christians, especially Caesar's demand for allegiance and recognition, all the gods, and the whole philosophy of Rome that might is right. And the early church, these 7 churches in those cities couldn't go along with that. And so what was going to be happening is that these Christians were slowly going to be marginalized and uprooted from their cities. Some of the churches, not all of them, some of them would suffer persecution. But this was going to be looming, and Jesus one of the reasons why he reveals the book of Revelation is that he's going to be telling them that in the future Rome is going to be applying the squeezing you a bit tighter as the church. There's going to be more persecution, and some people might have to leave their cities and go to other places. And this was slowly starting to happen. Cities became centers of persecution, some of these cities against the Christians. And that meant, for you to leave your city was a very big thing. Maybe some of you who've left the security of a city, prospects for your work. And for a lot of these early Christians, if they were getting persecuted, it meant you had to leave your job, you had to leave the business in the city, you had to leave the promise for your children of some sort of future which the city offered. It meant you were marginalized. And so I mention this because this is very important when you think of this final vision of the city. That the people of God had a great city, even though they might be kicked out of their worldly cities, even though they might have to go and live in tents and go and wander around in caves or whatever because of the persecution that was coming. God reveals there's a far greater city that's to come, and he wants this place of security, this place of life. He wants this picture of the kingdom of God to really be in their minds, that they would remember this as they go through hardship. So everything in Revelation is really written in the light of increasing the faith of people by getting them to see unseen things which are greater than the visible things. And this is one of the most important things what the apocalypse, which means Revelation, does. If you've looked at my WhatsApp profile, you could see, I have a little blurb there on my WhatsApp profile, and my little blurb says this: the greatest things are invisible. And if you think about it, that's very true. Of course, God is the greatest thing. You can't see him, but he is the greatest thing, and where Jesus is, and the apostles and the church and the Lord that's glorified in heaven and the future that's to come in the book of Revelation, these great things, you can't see them. And so it's very important that we read our Bibles, because we build our faith, and that means we build the organ by which we see invisible things. To see the beautiful nature around us, we use our human eyes, but to see the invisible things, you use the spiritual eye, which is called faith. That's what faith is. Quickly open to the book of Hebrews chapter 11. Let's look at Hebrews chapter 11. And look at Hebrews chapter 11. It says now this is from verse 1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, and the conviction of things not seen. This is what faith is, in the way that the writer of the Hebrews is showing here, of things that are hoped for and things that are unseen. Faith is the way that we connect with those things, and we live on the basis of those things. It's the assurance, says Apollos, because I believe he's the writer of Hebrews, although I could totally be wrong. That's fine. I like to think it's Apollos. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, and it is the conviction of things not seen. And it's by this faith that all these people were commended. And by the way, if you go down there, you see, for example, when it comes to Abraham, look about Abraham. Verse 8. By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as his inheritance. This is Hebrews 11:8. He went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, and living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. Why did he go and live in tents? For he was looking forward to the city which has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. Then let's go on to verse 13. It says, all these people in the Old Testament, they died in faith, not having received the things promised. But having seen them, they greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth, acknowledging that. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have opportunity to return. Verse 16. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. There you go. Sure. He has prepared a city for them. This is God, and we are actually seeing the city that Abraham was finally looking for, and was why he was quite content to live in tents and to go around and to live like he did, is because he saw something far greater. He was looking for a city whose builder and whose architect was God. So faith is very, very important, and faith in invisible things. And chapter 11 of Hebrews is going on to show that the whole of the Old Testament was just a shadow of something that was greater, a better temple, a better city, better promises. And those are the ones that have come in the kingdom in the Lord Jesus Christ, and that we see visualized here. So just as an introduction, let's remember the importance of faith that sees the glorious invisible things and gets strengthened by that. Because Hebrews chapter 11, the whole of chapter 11 is saying that you can only obey God if your obedience is motivated and charged by faith. It's by faith that all these people could do this. I mean, how can you be content living in a tent? Content in a tent the whole time. Especially if you know where Abraham did live, in Ur of the Chaldeans, with running water, and it was quite civilized, Abraham's original home. And God called him to leave all that. I mean, remember, it was always a promise. It was always something that he was to inherit, something that was... But the way that Abraham could be content and endure was knowing the invisible things that God was finally going to do and going to bring for him. And that faith in invisible things empowered him to be obedient. This is what the Apostle Paul in Romans calls the obedience that comes from faith. It is a very important lesson, isn't it? We have to see the glorious invisible things of God and of his promises and of the glories and wonders that he has promised us in our Bible. And as we see and believe those things, then we get charged and empowered to obey. You can't just obey. That's not what it's about in the New Testament. It's not just obedience. The New Testament Christianity is fundamentally about a faith. And that faith is about invisible things. And when you lock into that faith and you find contentment and joy and the glory of that faith, it fills you, then you are empowered to go and obey and go and do what you're meant to do. I mean, I could give you numerous illustrations. Remember, Jesus says, if you want to be my disciple, you must take up your cross. I mean, that's the ultimate thing of obedience. Being willing to die to yourself. Saying no to yourself. Being willing to die to your life and all your ambitions. That's what taking up your cross means. But the way Jesus speaks about it, he always says, and follow me. You see? And if you lose your life, you will gain it. There's always something overwhelmingly positive and that's promised. And that then requires, when we fill our lives with the promises, we are empowered to do the negative obedience side. We are empowered to do these things. So there's lots more I could say about that, but I felt I need to say that because as we look at this vision of the great city, these are invisible things and they're very important for your life today. More important than what you're going to do, where's your next move now? Here, you're living in Royal, so where are you going to go? Your retire, your next place, which old age home you're going to, who's going to look after you there, etc. You always need to keep in your mind the eternal glories and keep a vision like this. It's strong and full of faith in the forefront of your mind, that everything you could want or dream of or wish for, everything you're really looking for is promised in the city. It's the ultimate place of security and provision and everything. And we have to know that it doesn't matter if your house has been leaking now. Don't worry, there's a city that's yet to come.
It's not going to leak.
It doesn't really matter if everything's not perfect here, because this is not really our final resting place. It doesn't matter. Of course, that's the narrative of our world, is that this is everything, and you need to do everything to preserve everything. That's not the Bible's perspective at all. Our greatest things are invisible and coming in the future. So let's, with that introduction out, I nearly said out of the way, but hopefully guiding us forward, we can go on now looking at the city. So let's have a look at, open in our Bibles. I'm just reading, because I'm referring to the Bible a lot, I'm not using my translation. So I'm looking at Revelation chapter 21, and we're going to pick up here on the walls of the city and the gates. So we're going to just have to read again from verse 9. Then came one of the seven angels, Revelation 21:9, who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues, and he spoke to John, saying, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain, and he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Its radiance was like a rare jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. It had a great high wall with 12 gates, and at the 12 gates 12 angels, and on the gates the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel were inscribed. On the east were 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And we looked at last week verse 16, the city lies 4 square. So if you didn't join us last week, we were really beginning to look at the city and the echoes from paradise and the basic size of a perfect cube. And this is the Holy of Holies. It's an amazing thing, isn't it? If you recall what I said last week. In the Old Testament, a person only went into the most holy place very briefly twice a year on the same day, the Day of Atonement. In the New Testament, people live there. It's totally different. We live there now. We live in the holy place. And this is the cube is showing us this is a holy city, and this is where people live. And I've been saying to you, we must try and move out of a literalistic scientific way of understanding this as some sort of city, some sort of residence that's going to plop down from a certain point in hanging space. A lot of people fall into that trap, and as we go through, look at the facts of the city that's presented here, it's almost impossible for it to be a literal city. It's going to be impossible because of a whole lot of things that I'll be telling you. But it's 2,200 kilometer cube, if you want to put it in dimensions. This is the size that he's presenting from from Cape Town to Ruacana, the border of Namibia and Angola. This is the size, and the size is for a purpose. The size is to tell us that there's space for everybody. Okay? This is not just a little house. This is huge, because the 144,000 and all the people of God, they're going to fill this place. Remember, Jesus said, I'm going away. Why is Jesus going away? John 14, I'm going to prepare a place for you in my Father's house. Now, this is the Father's house that we're seeing in the city. This is where the people will dwell. And by the way, you'll be interested to know, or disappointed, that in the city there are no private cubicles. This is a public place. We're all going to live together in unity and peace, and we'd rather be with people than be on our own. It's a place of community, and that's important about the city. So the next thing, that was last week, we looked at the size of the city, the footprint. Now we're going to spend some time looking at the wall of this city of light. Verse 12 talks about that it had a great high wall, and also verse 17, he measured its wall was 144 cubits, and verse 18, the wall was built of jasper, while the city was pure gold, like clear glass. So let's have a look now at the fact of the wall. So that's the structure. We're looking from the outside. We're going to go penetrate further into the city. There is a great wall. Now, did we touch on this a bit last week? Walls obviously for security. It's very, very important for any city, and that's what makes a city. You can't actually be a city without a wall. And in the Bible, the difference between villages and wall and cities was the factor of a wall. You might read in your Bible when it says Joshua captured so many cities and so many villages. Well, what's the difference between a city and a village? It's really a wall. Cities were cities because they had walls. And a lot of the time, you can still go to England and still go to places in Europe, and you can see it was common up to the 1800s or so, that there were cities were places with walls. It's only relatively modern now, isn't it, the last 200 years, that we don't have walls anymore. But that's how most of the people lived in cities, and it was no good if you didn't have a good wall. Security is very, very important. But so this is telling us the fact of that it had a wall, and it speaks of the wall like jasper, which is like this red color, the wall like the red color, and it's going to tell us some details about that, and the foundation stones on around the wall. So because this is the city of peace, this is the city of peace, Jerusalem, the new Jerusalem, which is the city of peace, the wall speaks about the promise of peace and security. Maybe if you were writing the Bible today, you could just say, around this habitation there was laser beams everywhere. Well, you know, all right, you're protecting yourself. This is security. If you come inside, you're not going to be if life can flourish. You know that with your garden here, if you plant a garden or whatever, the mongoose or baboons, or the guinea pigs. Baboons are the problem for gardens maybe, but more the other little rodents. They're going to be a problem. You need walls. When you have walls, you can flourish. Everything can thrive. There's nothing that'll come in from the outside. And so this is what the walls around the city are speaking about. And of course, this is why it also can't be a literal thing it's speaking about, a city that has walls, because, as I mentioned to you, you don't need walls actually, because God's there. Why does the city need walls? Well, that's a question the Bible's not really approaching. It's not, but the question is helpful. It'll show, because it tells us that the walls are symbolic for something. There's no use for them because there is no need for them. There will be no enemies any longer. I mean, in Revelation, the dragon and everybody's thrown into the lake of the fire. Evil's over. So who's there to protect you from? So it's showing this wonderful truth of these people are in the hand of Jesus and they're in the hand of God. Remember that wonderful picture that Jesus, he said that my sheep are in my hand, and then the Father's hand is over that as well. No one can pluck them out of my hand, and then the Father's hand is also around Christ's hand. It's the way Jesus spoke about the security of the people of God. It's elsewhere the security of the people of God is pictured as our lives are hidden with Christ in God. These layers of the presence of God. And so this is what this is saying. Let's quickly have a look at Psalm 122 verse 7. Psalm 122 verse 7. And a lot of the pictures of the Psalms and Isaiah are going to come into play here. 122 verse 7 speaks about shalom. It's a prayer for Jerusalem. May peace be within your walls and security within your towers. Peace be within your walls. The Hebrew word, of course, is shalom, which is life in wholeness. May it be within your walls and security within your towers. This is exactly what this is offering. And then let's go to Isaiah 26. And just move over to Isaiah 26. Just further along. First prophet, Isaiah 26. Look what it says here. In that day, this song will be sung in the land of Judah. We have a strong city. He sets up salvation as walls and bulwarks. Open the gates that the righteous nation that keeps faith may enter. You keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you. So he sets, verse 1 says, we have a strong city. He sets up salvation as walls and of bulwarks. So what a glorious thing here in the city, that this is the place of perfect security and perfect salvation that is shown to us in the picture of the walls. Then let's go on to the next item. So those are the walls, and of course, as you're moving forward, the one thing that he sees next is the gateways or the gates. So let's have a look at the gates of the city now. Here you have some detail. Just maybe I should mention, what is the height of the wall? It's not clear here. The height of the wall of the city, it's just mentioned. If you have a look in verse 17, it says he also measured the wall 144 cubits. 144 cubits. That's a certain measurement. Now, this is also the number 12 times 12. That's another number 12 in the book of Revelation, which is important. But it just says 144 cubits he measured the wall. And the question, is it the height or is it the breadth of the wall? Most likely it's the breadth of the wall, although you can't be dogmatic on that. It's because, big walls were important. And I think in the walls of the city of Babylon, if you could drive like two big chariots next to one another on the wall, that was seen as a good spacious wall. You don't want a flimsy little thing. You want one when you can take traffic on your walls. So that was important. that you had, and this is sort of that type of space. It's very big space, so you can get 2-3 lanes on top of the wall. It obviously can't, it would be foolish for it to be the height, because if this is the height, it's like saying we'll have like the city's height is 2,200 kilometers, if that's the city's height, and the wall will be about 100 kilometers or less.
Yes.
I mean, that'll be stupid. You see, you can't put this together. And how high do you make the walls if the city's that big? You see, it's not telling us about the architectural detail. I think it's the thickness of walls to reinforce the sense of it's impenetrable and it's secure. So this gives great confidence for our lives. Then the gateways or the gates. So let's have a look at the gates, and this is verse 12. He tells you some details about that. I read that. And then also verse 13 and verse 14. So I'm going to pick up some. Firstly, the gates or the gateways. As I mentioned in the commentary, it's actually better to translate this as gateways. What's the difference between a gate and a gateway?
You cannot close one and you can't close the other.
Okay, yes. A gate can be closed. A gateway is a structure. You can't close a gateway. Obviously, yes. Obviously, gates are the literal gates. Doors has doors or some that bar access in and out. But a gateway probably includes the doors, but it's more of a feature. It's more of a sort of entrance place.
Like a passage.
Yes. It's a passageway, and this is probably better how we should see this. Not so much as just the gates. It includes the physical gates, but it's a whole structure. And these gateways were very important in cities in the ancient Near East. In other words, if you read the book of Ruth, remember when Boaz was wanting to find out about if there was any other member of the family who was entitled to take on the property of a deceased brother, called the kinsman redeemer. And so he went to the gateway of the city, and there he sat in the gateway of the city. And the people who were coming in, he saw them and said, "Come sit with me, I've got something to discuss." That was the place, it was the public place where you met people. And when you could call it was in the gateway. And this also happened throughout the Old Testament. It's the place where Absalom, remember when he was wanting to bring people away from his father's favor, you met at the gate and you addressed and spoke to people. So it's the place of human concourse, people coming and going, these access points. And there are 12 access points that he's going to be zooming into having a look at. And so let's look at some detail of this. Firstly, people online are coming back to join us. Firstly, it says here about the names of the people. Let's have a look at the names. Verse 12. And on the gates were the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel. On the gates were the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel. So this is the first thing we're going to be looking at about the gates. They're all named. One thing about these names is it's a connection again. Think with me about the high priest in the Old Testament. So let's go to the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, Exodus 28. So if you're just rejoining us, we're going to Exodus 28. We're in the high priest's garments, Exodus 28, verse 12. It's actually from verse 11. Let's actually go further back. Verse 9. This is the ephod. This was like a special pouch that the priest wore over his chest. And verse 9 says, "You shall take 2 onyx stones and engrave on them the names of the sons of Israel, 6 of their names on the one stone, and the names of the remaining 6 on the other stone." Verse 11, "As a jeweler engraves signets, so shall you engrave the 2 stones with the names of the sons of Israel. You shall enclose them in settings of gold filigree, and you shall set the 2 stones on the shoulder pieces," or this is on the 2 stones on the shoulder pieces of the ephod, "as the stones of remembrance for the sons of Israel. And Aaron shall bear their names before the Lord on his 2 shoulders for remembrance." And then we have verse 15, "You shall make a breastpiece of judgment, of gold, of blue," and verse 17, "You shall set it on 4 rows of stones." Here the stone sardius, topaz, etc. will come back to this. And it says in verse 21, "There shall be 12 stones with their names according to the names of the sons of Israel. They shall be like signets, each engraved with its name for the 12 stones. And the breastpiece was made of twisted chains like cords of pure gold." So on the high priest's garments, or rather on the ornaments that he had the 2 on his shoulders, and he had the 12 on over his chest, and they both were engraved with the names of the sons of Israel. So here we have something very, very similar. The city is also engraved with the names on these pearl gateways with the names of the sons of Israel. Once again, it's showing us that this is a holy city. This is a priestly holy city. This is the place where God is going to be dwelling, and his light and life is going to go out into the nations. It's a priestly royal city. This is part of what it's saying in the connection with the Old Testament. But it's also showing that these are the people of God. This is the names of particularly in the Old Testament, the names of the people of God. Because every Jew in the Old Testament was all could fit under one tribe. Just quite amazing for me. I mean, I don't have any sense of ancestral history that I'm aware of. Maybe nobody in our family's really gone back to show us where we fit in, and the heads and the tribes and the groups, etc. I was never brought up having that sort of awareness or consciousness. But in the Old Testament, everybody, you slotted in somewhere. You know what you were, your tribal head, your Judah, whatever, then you were one of the houses under that. You all fitted in somewhere. This was a way of identifying, of belonging, that people were people who belong to the people of God and people who have names. Now, why are they the names of the people of God here? Well, all these Jewish names of the tribes. This cannot mean that the city is only for Israelites, because it has the names of the 12 tribes. I have stressed, and if you remember, verse 9 says that he is showing him the wife of the Lamb. John is being shown the wife of the Lamb. This is what the city is. The city is the bride of Christ, the glorious church of the Lord Jesus Christ, his people, Jew and Gentile. So it cannot be saying that only sort of Jews go into the city, but it's using the names of the Old Testament, of the people, and saying, well, this is like the new Israel. This is the new people of God. And they are named after the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel. So it's a way of expressing a personal identity of these people, of being belonging to the people of God. It's not, once again, not a literal Jewish thing. It can't be in this context, and we'll go further and look at that. But there's a lot to say about this as well. Because if you know anything about the history of the Old Testament people, and particularly these people, I visited somebody recently in the church, and they wanted to know if I knew the names of the tribes of Israel. I've never been asked that before, and I thought that was actually a good question. So fortunately I was able, as the new pastor, to tell them who they are. I wouldn't have had a good beginning if I don't know the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. But one thing that is very clear is that if you look at those, certainly the forefathers, and if you look at all their descendants who find themselves in their father's head, they're never presented as people who are like the sort of special spiritual seekers after God and pure people. Reuben, even the firstborn Reuben, you read in Genesis what he did. Remember why he lost the entitlement. Then you read about Judah. What sort of person was Judah like? All right, Joseph, and he is one of the sort of holiest of all. But a lot of the ancestral, they weren't holy and righteous people. But they were those that God had brought about. They were his people, although they weren't the holiest and didn't have the best reputation. I think many people are under the delusion that the sort of Jewish people have some sort of spirituality or God gene that they're born with. But if you read the Old Testament is very clear that one thing that they are born with is rebellion against God. And it's only by grace that they and any other human being is seeking God. God often in the Old Testament wanted to wipe it clean of these rebels and start again with a new group. He was tired of them, their continual idolatry and moving away from him. He was tired of that. So the story of the Old Testament certainly of God's faithfulness to Abraham and his descendants and the new spiritual descendants of Abraham is that these people are not. Is that somebody's phone? Oh. That was my phone. Can you believe it? On my tablet. Never got a call. This is not really connected to anything. Well, my number's just on the tablet. I was nearly about to say, who, one of the people there, could you please switch your phone off? It's always a reminder to take the log out of your own eye first. Maybe it's your phone that's going off. Okay, so those are some things about the names of the tribes of the people of Israel, speaking about God's grace, God's faithfulness to his people. The other thing we see at this is that there are angels at the gates, at the gateways. And this is in verse 12. And at the gates are 12 angels that are there. Now, sorry, it's not Peter who's at the pearly gates waiting to receive the people here. That's the old jokes about Peter at the pearly gates. When you come to the pearly gates, of course, this is what this is trying to speak about. There are the angels that are here, angels at gates. Where in the Bible were angels guarding gateways? Do you remember? Where was an angel guarding an access or a gateway?
Garden of Eden.
The Garden of Eden, that's right. Remember, there was an angel guarding the gateway that they couldn't come back in here. And of these 12 gates, at these gateways, there is 12 angels that are around there that are also sort of guarding that those who enter are those who are entitled to enter. And this is expressed here. You see, these verses are all over the show about those who are holy. You can see verse 27. It says, nothing unclean will enter into it, nor anyone who does anything that is detestable or false, but only those who are written. So there is a sense that these angels are there to guard. They're like angelic bouncers to guard the access for people so that nobody will go in there. So this is another thing that is speaking of its wonderful security and purity and perfect life, because you've got an angel as on guard duty. He's on the security company. Don't have to worry about that. They are there guarding the accesses that the holy people and no people who harm are going to come in there. Now these gates as well are never shut. These gates and the gateways are never shut. You see where it says that there? Where does it say that? Verse 25. Its gates will never be shut by day. And once again, you come back to the question that I asked with the wall. The question you can ask here is again, why do you need a gate if it doesn't have to be shut? Why do you need this gateway? Or these gates won't be closed. And here it's probably you're talking about the visit. Why don't you take them off the hinges if you don't, if they're never closed? Are they there for some? Well, this is trying to communicate something. It's trying to communicate the perfect security that you'll have there, because when you've got an angel there, you don't have to worry about the gates. They never closed. And also it means there's perfect life of coming and going all the time. And as we'll see, another thing is because it's the city of light means that there's never a night there. So there's never day or night. It's just perfect life and fulfillment, because God is the light. So this is the 12 gateways. The last two things is the way he looks at the gateways. So he says they are laid out of 3 in the east, 3 in the north, 3 in the south, and 3 in the west. He goes through that particular order. The order starts off with these gateways. Verse 13, it starts off on the east side to make a description of that. I wonder if that's significant, that as he looks at the different bearings, orientation, he first sees it, describes the 3 gates on the east.
Sunrise.
Yes, now the east was very important to the ancient people. And remember the way the temple was built, the temple in the Old Testament, the way that both Solomon's temple and Herod's temple were built facing east. I think I've mentioned to you or Hebrew class, but here's what's interesting about language, because our words east, west, north, south, I wonder where they originate from. It doesn't have any meaning. The word south means just a direction in a certain way, north, etc. But the labels, the names that were used for the bearings of the Hebrew people were geographical. Those were the names. So the word, it doesn't actually say in the Hebrew east. It would speak about the sunrise or the desert or something like that, which was up over the Jordan. And the word for west in Hebrew is sea. That's the word west is the word for sea in Hebrew, because that was behind their back. So if you think of a map of Israel, the way the Jewish people got their bearings was to look at it as the eastward or the sunrise. The sunrise, that was the front. The sunrise, our east, to them was the way the temple faced. And the sea was behind your back, and you have high Mount of Zaphon, which was a mountain on the left, and the right hand was often used as a sense of the right on the west. Our west is the right hand, because if you're facing the sunrise, the right hand for the Jewish people on the right hand, that would be the west, our west. Sorry, south. Yeah. Our south, yes. Thank you. I am indicating here with my hand, so please interrupt me if I'm talking nonsense. But you've got to prove it. It could be quite easy for these to be corrected. So that's the way they got their bearings. And the east was important because that was the sense of where the sun would come. There's a new day with a life, with that sun, we'll see the symbols of light and life. It was very, very important that the sun came. And also it was a reminder of where they had come from, the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden was also from the place of the sunrise. And the nation of Israel was looking back to that, facing the place where the Garden of Eden was, where they were expelled from the Garden of Eden. So the bearings, and then he goes the north and the south and then the west as he goes through that. The last thing about these gates, and then we'll move on, is that they are made out of pearls. They are made out of pearls. Each gate or gateway, the whole structure, is a pearl gate, a pearly gate, these 12 gates. And why is it pictured as a pearl gate? Well, this is where the Bible's not that clear about things, and maybe you need to just use some of your imagination. Pearls, of course, were rare things and valuable things in those days. Very rare and valuable. I mean, for somebody to get a pearl, you had to risk diving down, and it took a lot of time for pearls to be made, how a pearl is made, and you could think about all that. And I'm not going to do a whole study on how pearls come about, but people have done that. But it was something that was very precious, wasn't it? It was a precious thing, valuable and precious, and something that is like a gift. And maybe this is the origins of why pearls are something that, that a bride or a lady wearing pearls, because this bride here of Christ has these pearls, these 12 pearls around her, and the value and the beauty and the ornamental impression that you get here is something that is greatly honored for people in those days. It is just something in us. When I was in the States, it was quite different to see people walk around with jewelry on. You realize, well, in Africa, you don't do that. If you're in certain places, because it'll just be pulled off. You've got to be careful with your jewelry. And of course, if you can't bring out your mother of pearls, and maybe you've inherited some jewelry or bought some expensive jewelry, because you'll be a target. That's just how it lives, how it is in our country. But here the bride is ornamented with the value and the dignity and the honor of something very expensive. And all the people who are going into this place are sharing in some of her beauty. All right, let's go on in the next 15 minutes. The next thing we will give some attention to is the foundation stones. So these are the foundation stones of this wall. And you can see verse 14, the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And then you can go down to verses 18, verse 19. 19 says, the foundation of the wall of the city were adorned with every kind of jewel. Then he goes through all the jewelry. The first was jasper, the second sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, the 12th amethyst. These are the precious jewels that are ornamenting the foundation stones. So foundation stones obviously very, very important in a city, like there are everywhere. And you remember Solomon. This is an echo as well to Solomon. See, this is how I've done, or how I do Bible study. I think, where in the Old Testament is there something with stones built in a city? And then you need to think, if you know your Old Testament, I wonder, Solomon, remember, it says about Solomon, he brought these massive stones that were chiseled in the quarry. They were chiseled and shaped and fashioned somewhere else, and they were brought in there. There was no noise of their construction in the city of peace, Jerusalem, but the noise was done somewhere else, and they brought these big stones. This is not concrete blocks or anything human. This is God's building. This is God's foundation stones. And for us here, you can think, wow, if you have huge foundation stones that are made out of rock, it's a good it's better than any brick that you can have. And of course, for those of you who've been to Israel, you can see some of Herod's, the remnants of Herod's, what's called the Second Temple. And you can see these massive stones. It's incredible, the dimensions of Solomon, and also Herod's found these stones of the wall. I think those were the wall, but these are of the foundation of the wall. Just huge. A reminder again that the whole city is presented and made out of natural things. There's no artificial, manufactured artifices that are coming into play here. It's all natural things that it's made out of. It's again speaking about of God's making. See, it's how God makes these things. These are God's stone. These are God's bricks, the foundation stones. And on these foundation stones, verse 14 says, and on them, on the foundations of the city, were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. The names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb were inscribed on these great stones. The names. Now I'm glad that person didn't ask me to recite the names of the 12 disciples, because I would stumble a little bit. So I must refresh on that, what their names are. So here we have on these stones the lambs, the 12 apostles. So you've got the 12 sons of Israel on the pearly gates, on each gate, and on each stone you've got the apostles of the Lamb being the foundation of the city. This is what the book of Ephesians says. Let's quickly go to Ephesians. Ephesians talks about the chapter 2. Chapter 2 talks about the church of God, the household of God. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 19 says, so then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone. There it says this whole household of God is built on the foundations of the apostles and the prophets. Some sort of formative and structural role in the people of God is the apostles. And let's think a little bit about that. It doesn't say, interesting, that the names of the 12 sons of Israel are the foundation stones, and the names of the apostles of the Lamb are at the entrances, which you might think, the Old Testament, aren't we sort of built on the Old Testament revelation? No, this actually shows the founding of this city. It was founded and begins with the New Testament and with the apostles of the Lamb. So this is the foundation. There's something foundational about what Jesus came to do and the foundation that he laid. Remember when Jesus said, I will build my church. And on building that church, he had the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And yes, they were all Jewish people as well. So this is also bringing out the importance of the connection with the Old Testament. But it wasn't tribal here. It was it was these individual people that Jesus chose, the chosen of the Lord, that Jesus was going to build his church with. And everything else that happens in the city was to be in line with the teaching of the New Testament and with the revelation of God that came in the New Testament. We are built upon the foundation of the apostles and of the prophets. They are the normative revelation of God, and we fit into that revelation that he has revealed to them. Quickly turn with me to the end of the Gospel of Matthew. The Gospel of Matthew. Why it is built upon the foundation of the Matthew chapter 28. Jesus gives the Great Commission, and he says to his apostles. Now these words of commission of the Lord, he's giving firstly to the apostles, and in them to the whole of the Christian church. But it is firstly to the 12 he's talking about, and he's saying they are to go make disciples of all nations. Verse 20, and to teach those nations to obey all that I have commanded you. Teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you. You need to think about what Jesus is saying there. Go into all the nations, make disciples. Here's what you must do. Teach those nations. Jesus says to his 12 disciples, everything I have poured into you for 3 years, everything I've taught you, which has been captured for us in the Gospels, everything that that's been cemented into your lives, that is now the foundation that you are to then go and take that and to teach the nations everything that I have taught you. If you forget that Jesus is firstly speaking to the apostles in this Great Commission, this won't make sense to you. But he's saying to the 12, all the nations out there, the same teaching that I've given to you, that foundation, it must be the foundation of everything that you go and teach the people. If you build off the foundation, it's going to collapse. And this is what happens in church history. Where people have built off the foundation, it's eventually collapsed or become another structure. People have done their own thing. But Jesus' church has a spirit level, has a plumb line to it, and that plumb line is in line with the foundation of the apostles that we have in our New Testament, and this is what we are built upon. Which I think for Catholic people is far more acceptable, because the Catholics believe that you've got to be in line with the apostles, you see, and the bishop and the pope, because that's what Peter is to the Catholics. Peter is a living apostle today. He represents the seat of Peter today. So what your pope says is exactly what Peter would say, and we are to obey him as much as we were to obey Peter. So for Catholics, understanding apostles is far more easier, but for Protestants less so. We do need to align ourselves to the 12 apostles, because we are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets. All right, I think that's as far as we're going to go for today. And then next week we'll let me just say before we finish a little bit about these ornamentation. I'm not going to go into that, but these stones, these foundation stones, are highly ornamented of different this gives you 12 different precious stones that you have there, and you can spend years comparing the Greek and the different translations exactly to work out what these colors were, etc. But this is again the beauty of the city. Something which is seemingly so insignificant. I mean, the foundation stones of any place, the most important thing a foundation stone is not its ornamentation of your house or your foundations, is it? It's ability to support, and its durability and quality. That's the important thing, not what color it is, whether it's beautiful. But here we have even the foundations of the city are spectacular. They're made out of God's handiwork. This is what these gems and these precious stones are saying. It's God's handiwork that He is so ornamenting them, and their radiance and glory and beauty shines through here. There's a lot more that one can say about this, but it's these uncommon stones expresses the worth and the beauty of the city. They're precious stones, foundation stones. Lastly, the last thing, if you compare with Babylon, remember Babylon also had a whole list. If you remember chapter 18 of, if you go to chapter 18, there's the whole lot of merchandise that's going in and out the city. Everything, this is trade and in and out the city of Babylon. Babylon is a place here of exchange and of business. And they are even in Babylon exchanging people's lives. You can see the end of verse 13 of chapter 18. They even trade in human lives, that is slaves. Chapter 18 of Babylon is a place of business, a place where things are bought and sold. Babylon is the place, as people say, that they know the price of everything but the value of nothing. It's just about business. But the bride city is the total opposite. It's the place where value is everything and price is nothing. There's nothing for sale or nothing being bought here in the city, because it's the beauty and the ornamentation is priceless. You can't put a price tag on these things. It's the glory and the beauty that God has made things. It is not a place where there's business. It's just a place of God's glory given to people. And that's where we'll end. It's God's glory that is given to people. That's why all of the structure of this great city is natural elements. It's gifts of God. What does the price of a diamond or a pearl cost? I think Jan would tell you, there's no price. Prices are artificial, aren't they? I mean, what is value? What does a rock cost? Well, you can try and work out something of what a rock would cost to make something. But it doesn't come with a price tag. Prices on things, of course, are projected onto them. It doesn't. But this city it's got the gifts of God, the glorious gifts of God. They are free that He gives in His grace. And this city's walls, the pearly gates, the ornamentation of all these jewels are expressing the glorious gifts of God by which Jesus is ornamenting and giving to His people. Unworthy as they have been, because they got the names of the tribes of Israel. And yes, even Peter, the one who denied the Lord, his name is also inscribed upon the foundation stone. But Peter was who he was made strong by the grace and the gifts of God, and the gifts and the calling of God upon these people and upon us. So we end off with that the most precious things that we have as Christians is those gifts which the Lamb and God have given to us, and how valuable they are. We cannot pay the Lord back for His gifts. There's nothing we can pay back. But what we can do, we can give thanksgiving and praise. I mean, to offer money for the crown jewels or something is an insult. there's no way we can pay the Lord back, but we can worship Him and we can praise Him. And I think it's for this reason that Psalms in Isaiah 60:18, it speaks about the gates will be praise. I will make your gates praise. That's Isaiah 60:18, when Isaiah has a vision of the Jerusalem glorified. He speaks about the gates will be praise. And it's because the great value and worth of the city is the gifting and the beautifying of God. I will beautify my place, he says in the prophets. It's His beauty. We can just receive it gratefully, not bring our 5 cents, or we saw last week, you don't have to bring your jewels into the city. No, they're worthless there. Anything we do, it's hopeless. God's gifts are glorious, and we receive them by faith and live a life of praise and thanksgiving to the glory of God. Let's pray. We thank you for the glory of the city, Father, that you have endowed with beauty and glory, from the foundation stones to the pearl gates, to the precious stones that are seemingly just such unnecessary ornamentation. And as we'll look further into the glory in the city, from the outside it's overflowing with glory, with wealth and honor and dignity. What a place to inherit and to live. And thank you that you have said, for whosoever will, let him come. For those who want to receive God's treasure and God's gifts of grace, they can come and take them freely. Father, forgive us trying to make ourselves worthy and acceptable, our futile efforts. But we thank you that the blood of the Lamb has purchased all these things, and the glory and the goodness of God are free in His grace. So thank you, and teach us to live a life of praise and of worship for the glories and the wonders that come freely from our God. In Jesus' name, amen.
Paul, you said that